Thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone coming this evening to our regular West Ada School Board meeting. And at this time, we will begin our Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll please mute your microphone and take a few minutes to recite the pledge, and we'll be back online shortly. Thank you very much. So at this time, we'll begin our regular session by reaching out to Clerk Newbold and ask if there's been any updates to the agenda or changes. Clerk Newbold.
Chairman Klopfenstein, trustees, Dr. Reynolds, there has been no updates. I have attached all patron comments and sent them to you all at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trustees, do you have any changes or amendments?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Smiley.
Yes, Smiley, please.
Just one thing that I wanted to say. I said this sometime back, but you know, in the interest of disclosure, some of the bill payments are going to entities like Idaho Power and Henry Schein Company that I noticed, and as part of a package of stocks that I own under the management of an investment advisor, I just wanted to disclose publicly that I do have rather small interests in both Idaho Power and Henry Schein, but it will not affect my vote, and I do plan to vote on those.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that transparency. Any other changes or amendments to the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Ozuna.
Trustee Ozuna, please.
I'd like to move that we pull consent agenda item 4C and move that directly to action because a couple of the board members were not at that meeting.
Thank you very much. Is there a second to this request?
Second.
Trustee Newhoff with the second. Thank you very much. All those in favor of making this change, please say aye.
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 And Chairman is aye as well, to make it unanimous. Any other changes to the agenda? And seeing that, is there a motion for the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I'd move approval of the consent agenda.
Thank you very much, Trustee Smiley, for that motion. Is there a second?
Second, Trustee Johnson.
Trustee Johnson with the second. Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 And Chairman is aye as well. That brings us then to the discussion portion of the agenda. And to begin with, we will be looking at revised policy 501.5. This is actually the third reading. Now, our new communications chair is going to, or communications chief is going to be reading the revised policy. However, as you know, she's a week and a half into the job, so she'll be going. Miss Jackson will be reviewing the changes that have been made to date. But probably since myself and Eric have kind of written this together, if you have direct questions actually on background or things that aren't directly related to the text, then it might be best for us to have that discussion with myself and the rest of the board. So anyway, to begin, Ms. Jackson, please. Ms. Jackson, are you in? Excuse me, Troy, is Ms. Jackson on the call today?
Yes, sir, she is or was. Looks like she may have just dropped off. Give me just a moment. I will try to invite her back.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm back in. Sorry about that.
Not a problem. Thank you very much.
It looks
So
like I
please go
might
ahead.
be
You-
having, oh, pardon me. It looks like I might be having some connection issues. So if I drop off again, I will dial in, but we'll keep our fingers crossed that this stays on for a bit.
Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Chairman Klopfenstein, trustees, Dr. Reynolds, this is the third reading of the policy at 9:04. And the changes made came from input in previous meetings, and I'll stand for questions now.
Trustees, do you have any questions on this policy or the changes that have been made?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Ozuna, and I have a few.
Trustee Ozuna, please go ahead.
I think we've talked about most of these. I might not have done a very good job getting some language over to Mr. Exline. If we could scroll down, I think it's on page 2, and look under attendance area criteria. In that first, right there, in that first paragraph under attendance area criteria, it talks about that we'll adjust school attendance areas when we're building a new school or when an addition has been created at an existing school. I'm wondering if we need to add some language in there that talks about addressing a potential boundary change when we have, when we need a boundary change due to growth in a certain area. For instance, like what we looked at with Hillsdale. The way that this reads to me is that we would only adjust boundaries if we build a new school or if we add addition at an existing school. But we may end up in situations where we don't want to keep a cap on long term, and we may want to look at some adjustments.
Have we ever done that? That's a question, I guess, going out to the district. Maybe,
Mr. Chairman, I can tell you that we did. Hillsdale was part of the conversation a couple years ago when they looked at changes. There was a committee process that looked at kind of, this one didn't go through, it was pulled. Mr. Exline explained that at our last meeting, that when they looked at trying to relieve Rocky Mountain and shifting some things around before the expansion that happened at Meridian High. So that's a couple that have taken place in the last, 5 or 6 years.
that's true. I think it was Meridian High had extra growth or had extra space, and it was Mountain View. We looked at that decision. But they looked at moving some of the kids from Mountain View over to Meridian High.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Yocum, please.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Superintendent Reynolds, there was another instance where we did adjust boundaries outside of what we have drafted this evening. Back in 2006, when Lake Hazel Middle School was very large, we moved about 300 students from Lake Hazel Middle to Lewis and Clark, and then about 280 students from Lewis and Clark to Lowell Scott at the start of the 2006-2007 school year. Lowell Scott was under capacity with the opening of Sawtooth at the time, and so we did have the ability to bump enrollment, as it were, from one school to the next.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Yocum. Trustee Ozuna, what kind of language were you going to propose to Mr. Exline?
I thought he was just going to add an additional reason that attendance areas might be adjusted to balance enrollment, something that was kind of general.
So we had something like.
I can work on some language if we need to. But I have a couple more things to go through as well.
Absolutely, please go ahead. I just want to make sure
we might end up wanting a fourth reading here.
Okay.
Depending where we land. So down on item number C there for emergency portables, and we had a pretty lengthy conversation on this a couple times, and Mr. Exline was going to add some language in there for when we might want to consider the portable space, and it looks like that paragraph is just not complete.
As I understand it, that sentence that doesn't have a period on it. It starts out, exceptions will be made if multiple schools in a. That just needs deleted. Apparently, that began to be deleted, and it just never came out of there. So that sentence should not be there. It should just end at or adjusting attendance areas, period.
Okay. So it looks like then he will generally not be considered available capacity. I know we've had lengthy conversations around that, and I would just put out the same warning that I had before, that in some cases these portables have been there and they're going to be used and we might need to consider them, but with will generally not be considered, I think that we can probably work around that.
Yeah, Trustee Ozuna, Trustee Ozuna, if I may, one of the things that in developing this policy, one of the things we did was review a number of different capacity planning documents, one of which was Boise School District. And I think it was another one in Colorado and a third over in Florida that we looked at. And the one in Boise, or the Boise School District document, basically doesn't use, they reference it, they say they know they have X number of emergency spaces, and they use that number basically for internal planning, but they also don't use that number for capacity planning just because it's in flux. And I think one of the issues was planners from the city or planners who are trying to build new subdivisions and such need a number that's consistent over several years, because it may take several years before development begins. And so providing that transparency was part of the reason why we'd stick with the design capacity. Does that make sense?
I completely agree with that for planning purposes. For attendance area criteria though, and I'll just use south of the freeway as an example, but if we were going to look at new attendance lines south of the freeway, I do think that we would want to consider any portable space that is there in balancing that enrollment today. And unless we were told by administration, these portables need to be out of commission and we're removing the number of seats there and, you know, don't consider those. But if they're still usable in an area that is so overcrowded, I do think we would want to consider that in a change, or have the ability to consider that if we were doing a boundary change.
Excellent, thank you.
So, let's see here. I have a couple more. Can I keep going?
Absolutely, please.
All right, scrolling down to number 4. So this is where we're talking about looking at priorities for the boundary committee, and it talks about feeder schools, and in this language it's talking about keeping percentages of students together so that they stay with their peers. I'd like to propose that we add some language that we not split a school to more than 2 schools at the next level. So for example, an elementary school we wouldn't want to send to 3 middle schools. This is a problem for these percentages of students. It causes a problem there, but it also causes a problem for staff when they're looking at sending those on because of the way that registration processes work when you go. And there's a lot of other things at the middle school going into the high school level. So this is one thing I know that has been fixed in the past. There's still a few elementary schools that look like this today, but I think it's a problem that we probably shouldn't put in place going forward.
Okay, thank you.
With the informational meetings, moving down under process. In here, it talks about that the process should begin no later than the fall prior to the opening of a new school. I think that we need to talk about if we're having a boundary change that isn't a result of a new school opening, then are we still using the same process? And if so, we might just want to clear up that language a little bit so it's not specific to only being used with a new school. I think we could just massage that language there if we wanted to consider that change. And then under public hearings, in that language, a couple bullets below, public hearings, there's language in here that we need to have a minimum of 3 public hearings. Over this last year, we did have 2 very small changes at the elementary level to balance some enrollment with our EL students, is what I vaguely remember. We carved out an apartment complex. I can't remember what the second one was. But I would think that with those types of changes that we're looking at, that it wouldn't go through this process and wouldn't require a public hearing. And I'm just wondering if we needed to address that at all in the policy.
So you're looking for an exception? I just want to understand what you're saying.
Well, I'm not looking for an exception, Mr. Chairman. I think this is the policy around the process used for attendance area changes. And most of this works well. Most of this policy works really well if we have a new school. But there are other reasons why we would do an attendance area change. For example, over this last year, we carved out a small apartment complex because we needed to move some EL students to another school. That's an attendance area change. I mean, that changes the attendance area map. And I don't think you would want to follow this process for that little change. Or maybe we do. I guess it's a question. But what happened in that case was there were direct letters that were sent because it was a very small handful of families that were impacted by this. And there was a separate approach that was taken for that.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Ozuna, Dr. Reynolds, I can look into that and find out if we do need to have that same policy in effect for the type of change you're speaking about.
Excellent, please. Mr. Yoakum, I was curious, for what Trustee Ozuna is talking about, what kind of, do you know by chance the history we've had as far as, I guess the exemption that she's talking about, the special case, I guess, is literally a special case. So things that might fall out of schools or growth, have there been a lot of those over the years?
Mr. Chairman, there has been just a few of those types of situations. The attendance boundaries have been adjusted far more often due to the construction of a new school than the other. The situation in 2006 was one exception, the one you previously mentioned regarding Meridian High School after the remodel to expand their attendance area. But other than those two, I don't think that there's been many other times that has happened.
Do you think, sorry, Mr. Yoakum, do you think that not having an exception like that would be a problem in this policy for district, or how best to word it, I guess? Is there something that maybe you could consider?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think we could certainly wordsmith that sort of scenario into the policy as another opportunity to change boundaries if the situation requires. One of the criteria, of course, at least in the two previous examples, that is required is that you have a school that is, quite under capacity. And the two times we did it, we did have that opportunity. So we could certainly wordsmith something in there as another reason why we could go forward with an attendance boundary recommendation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, would that work for you, Trustee Ozuna?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think, we want to be able to allow for those things, but I think we also want for small changes, not the ones Mr. Yoakum's referring to, but really small changes where like the couple that we made this last year, and Mr. Chairman, I could pull those up if we need to look at exactly what they were, but they were very small carve outs, but I don't think we want to follow this full process for those small exceptions. I don't think we want an informational meeting and a full boundary committee process with a public hearing. So I think we need to address that as well.
Okay, well, if you have, so I'm assuming this is probably going to go to a fourth reading then, with this many changes, but if you have some suggestions That would be great to see those.
Okay, if that works for everybody, I can get this in writing and get it over to Ms. Jackson.
So thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Smiley.
you know, one of the things that happens, and we've seen this time and time again, those of us that have been around for a while understand that when you start talking about, where your children attend school, that's a pretty big deal for families. And, it works best if we allow input. But, I think the situation with Hillsdale is, a pretty good example of where that community was so successful. And my wife and I were out there walking the attendance zone at Hillsdale, and we counted, over 30 houses that are somewhere in the process of construction in that walk. Yeah, actually, pretty much within the walk zone of Hillsdale. And those are the kind of things that I think that it is probably wise, because as a public school, we have to accept every child. And with Hillsdale, we had to involve Sienna and Desert Sage, I believe, as kind of areas to relieve the pressure. And those kinds of options do need to continue to be available to the board in such emergency situations. And I do agree that perhaps this language could be wordsmithed a little bit to still allow for public input on these, but also to acknowledge the reality of when a large subdivision is approved. And I think we do that partially there where it talks about city planners from municipalities served by the West Ada will be invited to be part of the attendance era committee as ex officio members, not to determine the reconvision, but to facilitate the process, sharing planning goals between agencies. And I think that's kind of getting down to that, because right now we have 14,000 plats that have already been approved. And even if no additional plats are approved, there is going to be growth. And how that growth is done has to be a cooperative effort. But at the end of the day, the school district has to make those decisions. And that means us as the Board of Trustees. And I don't want to handcuff ourselves to have the flexibility that is needed to have when those kind of situations arrive. Because I was out, we've been out walking in the area around Pleasant View. We couldn't count the number of houses that going up out there. The same area with the subdivision that is immediately to the south of the Hillsdale attendance zone. There is they have bulldozed several rather large fields that obviously is going to have houses going up there. And the challenge is keeping up with how fast those houses get built, whether it's one every few months or whether there's like what we saw out there. Those houses are going up quite rapidly, and they're going to have children who are going to need to be attending schools. And we are going to have the flexibility as a board to be able to, after getting adequate input from the community and considering our options, that we do what is best for the children as well, so that they aren't constantly getting their school zones changed. But then a situation like Pleasant View and Hillsdale, we might have to do some tweaking. And we also did that with the situation with Summerwind Elementary, because they had a special program that the other school didn't have. And it was better for the district with those handful of children that were involved to make that switch. And it worked out for the good of everyone, I believe.
Thank you very much, Trustee Smiler. Is there any other questions about this policy?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson.
Trustee Johnson, please.
So I would echo support for the changes that Trustee Ozuna pointed out. I think those all make good sense. I actually have a question, since Eric's now retired, and it sounded like you had a pretty good hand in drafting this. because I want to play out a scenario and see how it would play out based on this policy. So Trustee Smiley brought up Hillsdale, and I know tonight the city is reviewing a 5,000 house subdivision development out in the Hillsdale zone. And I don't know what will happen with it, but I want to know, based on kind of this policy, would, because I read through it, and I've been reading through the language a couple times. So what I want to know is there anything that limits in this policy a redrawing of boundaries when there's a situation where we can spread out more students in an area because there are some capacities that free up in other schools? Just, you know, there might be special program movements, there might be the mix of students changes at an elementary level. I don't think there is, but I want to confirm with you that there isn't. I think what we're guiding is a process that says we want to keep kids, we don't want to move them more than once if we don't have to. We want to keep them in a walk zone. We want to maximize our capacity, but I want to make sure there isn't anything in this policy that limits us from doing that in like exactly what Trustee Smiley said, which is kind of emergency situations where we find we have some capacity that we need to use.
Could you be a little more specific?
Yeah, is there anything in this policy that limits us from moving students around if we have capacity in other areas of the district that we find we can use?
At this point, I don't know. I think it's trying to outline a process and also make it so that we're being more transparent for, you know, for our partners in other municipalities, that they would know where we stand as far as what our capacity is, what our capacity numbers are, and then what our process to move children. Mostly, this is trying to say that we would have a yearly, we have set numbers A, and that we would have a yearly process to review our boundaries based on new construction, based on changes within the district. What Trustee Ozuna is talking about is adding another section that would potentially change things for non-construction oriented exceptions, those special cases. I haven't read that, so I guess I don't know how to comment.
Okay, so I think what I heard is that when we add that language, you might make my question. The answer is there's nothing that limits us, but right now we don't know because we haven't seen that language, and that's okay. I want to leave. The process is great. All of the information is good. I've been reading the language, and it's not prescriptive and definitive. It gives guidance, but it doesn't give requirements in kind of the prioritization. But I want to make sure we always have that ability, if we need to maximize our capacity, because we have some over enrollments that are causing educational issues, which is usually what happens with over enrollments in certain areas of the district.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is not what you were saying. What I'm saying is that we have a process that's fair for all children, and that makes sure that we have capacity that's available for all children, so they have an equal, an equitable education. And I think that's what we're trying to do. We have a limited resource, and it's especially dire south of the freeway because we have so much construction going down there. We want to make sure that our partners can know what that capacity looks like, and then be able to have a process that's visible and transparent to parents. I guess that's what we're trying to do now. So when we see the additional language later on, then we can respond further.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to avoid is something that says our policy doesn't allow us to maximize our capacity unless these things happen, which is something like a new school is built or a new addition is added. So I think that language will actually solve that gap.
Well, I mean, it'll have to be passed by the board, and I have to admit, like I say, I haven't seen the language, so I don't know. But I think our mantra as a board and as a district is a fair and equitable education for all children. That's also safe, especially in these days. And we want to make sure that we definitely adhere to that. And so I think just having a fair playing field for all children is kind of what we're shooting for.
Yeah. The other, I guess I would like to, if there's an opportunity to, I would like to hear the opinions kind of on, does this policy meet what everybody expects from a board trustee perspective? I know we've had different changes, but we haven't had a lot of discussion on kind of the prioritization. And so it'd be good to know kind of if everybody's comfortable with that.
Does anyone else wish to comment on this policy? Oh, no, we're not hearing anyone. So.
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Ozuna.
Trustee Ozuna.
Having served on an attendance area committee, the prioritizations of these considerations that you need to think through is really tricky, because parents all have a different opinion on what's most important. I'll just throw out some things. For example, is a walk zone, does that carry higher priority than maybe a safety issue, like a canal that goes through a neighborhood? You know, you don't want kids to necessarily cross over a canal. Those types of things. And parents have different opinions about that. And so one thing when I started on a boundary committee that I thought would be really helpful is if the criteria was prioritized by the district, so that when you get into a certain situation, you can follow the prioritization, rather than having all of these parents that have their own opinions. And those opinions are swayed largely also by what they want the outcome to be. So if the rest of the board members haven't read through the priorities or really thought it through, I think it is something that if we put this in the policy, and if the policy is approved, I would expect that those attendance area committee members will really be following those. And so we want to make sure that it reflects what we feel is the right thing to do.
Question back to you, Ashley. Do you think that having a prioritization of criteria, would that create a situation where what's being considered in one part of the district is kind of would it force fit, I guess, solutions in other part of the district where it's maybe a bit different?
I think that's tricky. I think that the language here puts prioritization there, but it still allows for flexibility. And I think that's important, because sometimes you just can't follow the priority. Even if we prioritize them, there's going to be times that we just can't follow. So we do need to have some flexibility there, but it will guide the committee members to consider those things in order when at all possible. And I think that they should. We need to balance enrollment. We need to make sure kids are safe. Like, those kinds of things need to take priority over feeder schools or walk zones. Some of the things that are a little bit trickier are around how many kids do we want to move at one time? Do we feel like minimizing the number of kids that are moving, is that more important or less important than keeping a neighborhood together?
I'd be really curious about what other trustees, their perception on an important point.
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee Smiley.
Keep in mind that the black language is already in policy, and that the red language is the proposed amendments. And so there is a list of priorities as you work down where it says attendance area criteria and considerations. The current language is there, and then amendments are getting proposed that are in red. And so, walk zones are down, priority number 5. And of course, I think it's given and understood that the board always has the option, in a situation of an emergency, of changing an attendance zone. And, what we did with Frontier and Summerwind last year is a good example, because we had an individual situation where units in the apartment complex in order to facilitate a program, we did make that small adjustment. Well, of course, no adjustment is small when it involves your child. That's the one thing you learn. But it was, you know, looking at the overall district, relatively minor. And the few parents that were in touch with me, because it was in my trustee zone, and I had several parents that were concerned. But when they figured out what was going on, you know, and some misinformation had gotten out, they were fine with it. They totally understood what was going on. And the other thing is, we've often, when we do change, you know, that, like you're talking about a junior or senior in high school, we have allowed on a case-by-case basis and to give those students kind of grandparent privileges to say finish out their senior year or whatever. We have done that in the past as well. So there are exceptions to this. And, you know, I think the red language is an improvement, but I also concur that there might be some little tweaking that we could do to make this even better. So I wouldn't be opposed to going to a fourth reading unless that is something that is it's time sensitive.
Point of clarification, Mr. Chairman, is the black language already approved, or is it just that the red language has changes from the last time we saw this draft policy?
Yeah, it changes from I believe this changes from the last time.
Yes. So the entire policy is new, correct?
Mostly, I think there's also, I think a lot of this criteria does get carried over from the current policy. But that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. My experience, Mr. Chairman, in the legislature is the rule is black language is existing language, red language is changed language. Now, if I'm wrong on this one, I will stand corrected, but that's the way we've done it in the past. So because this used to be, let me look here. This used to be series 500, and we're simply moving that over to series 900. And so this is stuff that's currently in our policies, unless I'm mistaken. And please correct me if I'm wrong. That was my understanding.
I do not believe this is current policy at this point. I do not believe we have approved this yet.
Mr. Chairman, clarification?
If I may, Clerk Newbold.
Chairman, trustees, the red is the information that Mr. Exline provided from your input from the last reading. So the red is the new information that was requested from the last meeting.
So then this is all new language then, is that correct, Clerk Newbold?
Some of it is new language and some of it is not. It's been taken from policy 50, the previous policy, and then language was added last time. So language has been added each reading.
Is that clear, Trustee Smiley?
Boy, I would have to pull up different policies, and right now I can't because I'm here. So it'd take a few minutes to pull up the policy manual right now that's at the website.
Yes, we are. Okay, so 501.5, which has now been pulled up, basically is a list of, in essence, it's a list of options, things that the board will consider but not be limited to, guidelines for creating changes to walks or attendance area. And so it's a fairly limited policy at this point, and it doesn't include how we consider capacity, how we manage, how we actually run the meetings. None of the actual application of the changes itself. Were you able to hear me, Trustee Smiley?
Yeah, I just fired up my other computer, and I'm looking at I'm looking at Series 500, and the current language only lists building attendance zones shall be reviewed periodically and shall be established by the Board of Trustees, and then it just has A, B, C, D, E, F, H. And it says the above considerations are not necessarily listed in order of priority. So I'm glad I have two computers here in front of me. So yeah, this is substantial change from the Series 500 that is currently in our policy, which I think it does behoove us then to consider that there. Yes, I see that right there in front of us now. So
Yes,
I would also support going to a fourth reading to make sure that I've been able to digest this, because this was something I thought we were only considering the red language, and that was an oversight on my part.
I understand. Are there any other comments about this policy?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Ozuna.
Trustee Ozuna, please.
I'll send over some suggested language to Ms. Jackson, but I do think, and I agree with Trustee Johnson, that it would be really beneficial for us as a group to actually talk through those priorities and make sure that we agree that that's where we want them to land. I just think it's too important to not have that conversation. That was something that putting the priority in there, Mr. Exline did, but we did not have a conversation about how we felt about those.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I just make a comment. Every time we take a look at this, we're getting a little bit more into the woods. The current policy that is on the books right now was pretty straightforward and simple. And what we are considering has now gone through 3 sets of changes and maybe now a 4th. So yeah, I think it, my personal opinion is let's make sure that all of us as members of the board are comfortable with this language, because what we have in the attendance zones right now is quite a bit simpler. And, sometimes you can get to the point, instead of having a horse, you're building a camel, and we don't want to go there either. So I think it's a good idea that we really thoroughly digest this.
Absolutely, and this is definitely a big and important policy. I think going back to kind of the reason that this was being created was partly because of concerns from our municipal partners, the city of Meridian especially, that there were some concerns about how we were communicating our capacity, how we were communicating our process for change. And so I think the reason was it's such a big policy is probably because we've had such a long-term process that's really been unwritten. And it's been a good process that's carried us through close to 22 years. But I do think it behooves us to have something that's available for our sister municipalities, our sister organizations, to be able to, just to understand to be transparent with them about what our process is. And that's probably why we're going through this. Excellent. Then not seeing any other comments, then let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is an update on the fall plan. And before we start, I did just want to notice we had several patron comments that reached out to the board, and I do want to. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about this as well, and I just want to make a quick comment before we start that I think there's some concern that that we basically have that we as a district and as a school board are not respecting the decisions from Central District Health, and that we're not prioritizing the safety of our district's 4,000 employees. And I do want to counter that to say that no, we actually are. And in our decision the last board meeting, we definitely use what we consider, at least I consider, a litmus test on the board, which is that everyone is going to be safe and that we are providing quality education. And so in that last motion, we agreed to follow CDH guidelines, but made sure also the district had maximum flexibility to address the district's educational needs. And that's different from surrounding districts, and that might be a little confusing, but it addresses our problem of having an extremely varied student population. And this does not mean that in red, this does mean, that in red, the district could potentially have at least some in-person instruction. We wanted the flexibility to be there while also making sure we understand and adhere to CDH guidelines. So the fallacy, unfortunately, is that this is both unsafe and it's against CDH guidelines, and I don't believe that's true. And to make sure that we were on the right path, I reached out to Gina Pinnell, who spoke in front of the board several weeks ago. She's from CDH, and she said to me that I believe it's wise to start looking into this, being allowing small groups, at least small groups in red even, as a way to slowly and strategically bring in small groups of students at a time for more intense educational support. She also said that if in red or category 3, she would not recommend these populations come in for 5 days a week, but possibly staggered or a few times a week and for shortened days. So what we discussed and what we approved last week is very much within CDH guidelines. In fact, it's also very much within the understanding that we have to provide an equitable education for all children, and that this is something that is important for the district and for the specific needs of all of our children. So anyway, just something I wanted to bring up, and kind of the idea that West Ada is really here for teaching our students safely and making sure that our staff is safe, and that we will do our best and everything we can within our power to do both. And that is our lens, I guess, that we're looking at some of these problems. So to start, I believe Mr. Brett, I believe you have some things you'd like to bring up. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Klopfenstein, trustees, and Dr. Reynolds. I will try to keep my updates brief tonight. I do have an update to the plan to change the frequency with which we will be using our Victory sprayers to disinfect classroom surfaces. As I believe you are all aware, the Victory sprayer is an electrostatically charged sprayer with a cleaning product that is approved to kill the virus. Currently, the plan indicates that this sprayer would be used in classrooms every 2 days. However, I'm very happy to report that our custodial staff is planning on using this sprayer to disinfect desktops, countertops every night in those classrooms. So that's a good update that I will be making to the plan, and update that version that's available on the website, hopefully by tomorrow morning. The second update kind of relates to what you started with, is that, as I'm sure you are all aware, Central District Health in their weekly category recommendations continues to have West Ada School District listed as category 3 red. And so based upon those recommendations, if we were to open school tomorrow, we would be in that red category 3. And for at least the majority of our students teaching remotely, though we are continuing to identify, and our special ed teams at the buildings will continue to identify special populations of students who will need to be considered to be brought in on an alternating day schedule, small periods of time, and really small groups for their specific learning needs. And then the third update is regarding PPE. Wanted to give an update to the board. We have ordered a large supply of that personal protective equipment to start the year. Just a brief rundown, approximately 134,000 for PPE, which includes over 60,000 reusable cloth face masks in both regular and child sizes, as well as disposable masks, face shields, and portable counter shields for office areas. And then additionally, we've spent just under $100,000 to outfit every classroom with wall-mounted hand sanitizer dispensers and the refill cartridges for those dispensers. And then I believe just as early as this afternoon, a large order of just individual bottles of Purell hand sanitizer have also been purchased to be used as needed throughout the district. So those are the big updates that I have. I will stand for any questions and discussion that you would like. Thank you.
Trustees, do you have any questions for Mr. Heller?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Newhoff.
Trustee Newhoff, please.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I guess I was hoping that Mr. Heller could kind of give us an update on where things are standing with the individual building plans and with any movement or what the plan is to sort of take that into an additional level of granularity down to the classroom level for, hopefully whenever we're in yellow and we can actually get back to the school.
Thank you, Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Newhoff. I know that our building principals are turning those plans in. They've been turning them in all week to region directors. And there's a process where the region directors review those plans, make any recommendations, changes, et cetera, communicate with principals. And then I think as of the last day or two, those are actually starting to go up onto building websites. I believe I looked earlier today and Meridian High School's plan is now on their website. I believe Troy in his magical way is pulling that up for us all to see right now. And so that's happening as we speak. The directors, I know they've been spending an awful lot of time reading through each of those plans and working individually with those schools to make any necessary adjustments. In terms of the next layer, which is that individual classroom planning, I believe it's something we're continuing to talk to principals about. It's one of those things that every principal already works a lot with their teachers to identify, for example, what's your classroom management plan as a teacher? Well, this is now a different layer of classroom management planning for teachers in terms of how they're going to set their classrooms up for an alternating day schedule to ensure physical distancing, how they're going to handle everything from students being allowed to use the restrooms or hand washing and hand sanitizer. So all that work is also kind of happening. Obviously, our teachers are not on contract yet. They're all absolutely thinking about all of these protocols and coming up with how they would like to use those. But we haven't seen formal plans from individual teachers at this point. But that certainly is something we can continue to work on.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then I just had one other question, because certainly CDH said we're in red this week, and given that they're looking at, I haven't seen what came at their meeting tonight, but they were looking at adding some additional mitigation measures. So one kind of suspects that we're going to be in red for a little bit here, which probably means we're going to have to open up remote. So can you kind of give us an idea about where we're at and trying to sort of induce remote learning? I mean, how are we going to go in with a first grader and get them started on a educationally appropriate path with that, for instance? And I mean, it varies obviously with what age level you are, and one might imagine some of the high school kids would go into a little bit more organically than some of the younger kids. But I don't know if you can speak to that at all.
Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Newhoff, I will say that, there's still some optimism based on some conversations with CDH that things are improving, that possibly we could be opening still in yellow. We're hoping that is the case, but surely planning for the worst. And you brought up first grade, and that one's a specific one that's close to my thoughts, as I have a wife who teaches first grade for us, and she is having those very conversations. I leave at the end of the day thinking that I'm going to take a break from thinking about all of this, and then I now begin talking about it at home and how we're going to handle that with my wife's classroom or my 2 elementary age daughters' classrooms. What I do know is that our digital integration folks have put together some fantastic training, including some training that can be used with parents and teachers that we are hoping to get out in the very near future to parents and to students, so that they can start looking at some of those, and they will be able to jump on and engage if we are in red right off the bat. Obviously, one of the first first tasks we're going to have to identify is if we believe we're opening in red on September 8th, what is our distribution of devices going to look like, and setting that up at each building and having whether it's a drive-through device pickup like we had at our high schools and middle schools in the spring. So that plan is happening, and IT is working closely with the buildings and with our librarians to identify the checkout process. And then our curriculum and instruction folks have put together some fantastic resources that we're actually going to be starting to really roll out officially tomorrow to our building principals to start helping those teachers as they begin to plan. Obviously, the challenge with anything with education, with teachers not being on contract, obviously challenges some teachers planning. I do know I've talked to a number of teachers in the last few weeks, as I'm sure you have as well. They are planning, they are working, they're doing the things that they do every summer to get ready, and they're all doing a lot of planning for both red and yellow right now. And that the digital integration stuff that we have available for parents and students, pushing that out in the very near future in our communication is going to help those folks who've never experienced using Teams. We also have elementary teachers using an app called Seesaw, which is really a very good application for remote learning for the younger grade levels. So we know we have a lot of teachers that are using that platform. So I know a lot of work is happening, but the next step is really the communication to parents so that they can access those resources and at least start to feel comfortable with how they're going to work with that with their students in red, if that's how we are on September 8th.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Johnson.
Thank you. I want to get clarity on something really quick because I think it's been a confusion and I've gotten a number of questions, and we all need to be consistent in our communication on this. And that is whether we open in yellow or red, there is still a decision point in both of those that we can open with children in school and staff in school, or we could open fully remote. That decision point has yet to be made, but both of those options are available in both yellow and red. Is that correct?
I believe everything is up to CDH for those decisions based on their guidance.
I'm sorry, let me be more clear. The category could be yellow or red, but how our school operations goes, there is options for what we pick from a decision point for how schools open in the categories that CDH declares, which could be a yellow or could be a red. So it's our school operation decision that I'm confirming, because when I look at the language, we have both language for an option of using alternating days or staggered schedules or school closure with remote learning in both school operation definitions of the categories for yellow and red. Level of operation is what I'm referring to.
Mm-hmm. And I believe the idea is maximum flexibility to give the district the ability to open for special needs or maybe even also for the wider district to be able to close down if they're in yellow for a building. If the idea was with apply to CDH, but offer maximum flexibility. Okay. That's what I understood.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's what I understood too. I just want to make sure our language matches what our plan says, and I'm getting confused in it. So I imagine patrons could be too. So I just wanted to get clarity for that purpose.
Absolutely.
The other question for Mr. Heller, and I want to understand because I'm pleasantly, happily surprised to see some school safety plans coming out, but I want to talk about what's going into those plans and understand, because we have some specific language in our reopening plan around the physical safety. We didn't add language around the masks last week, but we do have physical distancing and sanitation in the language today. And I wanted to know how we're instructing or encouraging building principals to utilize that language within their building plans. And then I want to know also how we're instructing building principals to use languages around masks within their school building plans.
Thank you, Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Johnson. So as I looked at the plans that I've seen just some of the examples that the region directors have shared with me. The plans have included language regarding the mitigating measures, the sanitizing, some of that, and then the language regarding masks. And our plan continues to say that masks are required. There was conversation at the meeting last week regarding whether we wanted to change any language for mask requirements after a mandate from Central District Health no longer exists. And that's something that the board, I think, still needs to grapple with and make some decisions on. But our plans, in the plans that I have reviewed, that I've seen, is that we are requiring masks in our buildings. With that said, we also know we are going to deal with individual situations where families, for medical reasons, students won't wear a mask for a medical reason. We've seen religious reasons where they won't wear a mask. We have seen, and we also know we're going to have some that just come to school and say, we don't agree with wearing masks and we're not wearing them. And so we've talked with principals and we'll continue to talk with principals. In fact, we meet with principals tomorrow for a all things COVID meeting and really start digging in even more to these things. And one of the things we know, just like any other behavioral issue that may come up, where a student refuses to wear a mask or comes to school and says, my parents don't believe in masks and don't want me to wear one, that we're going to deal with those case by case like we do any other situation. And we're going to engage with the parents. We're going to have conversations about the why behind a requirement, and we're going to work with those things. But our goal is to keep students in school and keep students safe. And so if we can do those two things and work with the parents, then we're going to do that. Those students who can't wear a mask because of a medical reason, we're going to work with the principals, are going to work with those teachers to identify where does that student sit in the classroom to best protect that student and protect any other student. So those are things that continue to be discussed with our principals. And I have seen some of that language in the plans, and we are kind of instructing our folks to build that into the plan. There is a cleaning processes section of the plan where they need to build in their specific measures that they are going to have, including things like classroom layout and how they're going to handle office areas. So those are built into the plan, and then principals are going to just individualize that for their facility.
Okay, thank you. One follow-up, because I'll let somebody else go after that. But Mr. Heller, when will we be able to get a demo of what a fully remote classroom instruction will look like for the different grade levels?
Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Johnson, that's a great question. I guess that's something I would need to work with our team on a little bit more to figure out what a demo like that might look like. Could you give me more of a clarification of what you would like to see to help you or the board have an understanding of what that would look like? I think it's going to vary greatly, grade by grade, even content by content. Can you give me more information on what you might be looking for in terms of what that demo would look like?
Yeah, I can give you some high levels. So specifically, how's content going to be delivered? How are assignments going to be submitted? How are assignments going to be, how is the educational engagement going to look for, say, a first grader versus a 12th grader? So I have some secondhand information from the summer pilot, and maybe, but I don't know if that summer pilot is going to be used district-wide at an elementary level. I just don't know. So what I'm hoping for is a high-level demonstration of here's how, and I'm assuming it would have to be used for the parent training as well, but here's how a first grader will access and meet with their teacher in a fully remote. Here's how the teachers can, there might be more than one option, deliver the instruction in that situation. We have no visibility into that yet, and I think it would be really helpful to see how that's going to work to help make the decision around whether or not, because I think that Trustee Ozuna echoed this last time. I don't know or have comfortability that fully remote will work in all cases or in many cases yet, because I just don't have the information. So I'm looking for a demo that gives us some information on what that might look like for a student and a teacher on those fully remote days, or on every day if we're in the fully remote situation.
Thank you for that clarification. So we have designed some professional development sessions for our August professional development days with staff that are doing very similar to what you're asking. So we could certainly provide some of those to the trustees. And then we also, of course, have some videos from some of the summer K-5, both the K-5 pilot and the summer middle school and high school summer school programs that we could provide to the board so that you can start to get an idea of what this might look like. And then we have, as I mentioned before, some documents that are being put together, exemplars and things like that from the curriculum instruction team that we can provide to the board to give you a sense of some of that.
Thank you. I think it'd be just helpful to see what is a student, you know, if we start in a fully remote on September 8th, what's a student going to experience? So.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Trustee Johnson. Other trustees have questions for Mr. Heller?
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee Smiley.
Couple things, and I've brought these up before, but this is something I specifically want to dig into, and I appreciate Mr. Heller's discussion. But one is, you know, if we do open to where there is contact, especially the area of wearing a mask, and that we are in a good position. I know the governor has called a special session of the legislature to deal with liability concerns, which I think maybe frightens a few constituents as much as it reassures them, you know, because the implication is we'll let your child get sick and then we won't have any liability. And that scares me to death. You know, so the enforcement of a mask policy, and the other thing is that also make us to where we have to spend the money, whatever it is, to provide that equipment if we are requiring. So that's the first question. I'll let you get into that a little bit more if you would.
Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Smiley, if I understand your question, you're specifically talking, you know, about liability and then specifically the mask mandate that exists now, and then if that mandate were to go away, our requirements of providing the mask in order to facilitate that. Is that your question?
Yes.
So we have received some guidance from our own attorneys regarding liability, and as you mentioned, there's going to be some work being done at the legislative special session regarding that. I think much like anything else, when it comes down to things like liability, especially when you talk about a virus, it can be very difficult to identify and prove where a student or a staff member contracted the virus, and then there also has to be a level of negligence involved in order for liability to be there. But we are anxious to see what the legislative session brings forth in terms of that. With masks, I think for us, the answer for us is we're requiring students to wear masks. We're going to be providing masks. Much like anything else, if we required school uniforms, we'd be providing the uniform. And we know that some of that is there. In a chemistry lab, we provide students with the goggles and the lab coat if necessary. In the welding lab, we provide students with the welding helmet. Now, that is not a individual helmet for every student. Those are shared, and in the world of COVID, we now have built protocols for the cleaning and rotating of those helmets so that students are not wearing them the same helmet as another student in a short window of time until they've been cleaned. But we provide those safety equipment because it's something we're requiring the student to do because we believe it's the thing that will keep them safe. And that will be the same thing with these masks. We will require those and we will be providing those. Jonathan, if you have questions specifically on long-term, how long can we afford to pay for that type of equipment in a budgetary sense? I know that Jonathan could certainly answer that if you'd like more information from the budget side of things.
Because, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Heller, you're absolutely correct that there's dual considerations is, the budgetary impact, but the one that I'm more interested in is the safety impact. And, this is ground that, all of the school districts in Idaho are facing together. And I too listened to most of the CDH meeting this afternoon. And, it was something to where they made it clear that every school district is going to have to set up their own set of guidelines, which potentially could mean in the state of Idaho, we have 160 completely unique opening plans, which I can't even go there and begin to imagine how complicated that's going to be to figure out, but it looks like that's the way we're going. So I think that the budgetary standpoint is one thing, and of course the safety standpoint is another. And to me, changing that definition in yellow and red to me only meant that if we were in a red situation like we are now, that it would be a very, very small group of children that there would be one-to-one contact with, never an entire class, never a situation to where we're going to have any more than maybe a handful of children that we're doing one-on-one. But as you mentioned very, very precisely, there are those certain population of students that do need, even if it's only for an hour or a short period of time, that do need that one-on-one contact to help get them set up with the program they're doing, like language development, etc. Special needs classes, things like that. The other thing that I'm hearing a lot is the need for clarity. And when the landscape is changing literally day by day by day, that is something that is even going to be more difficult, because I agree, if we were to open tomorrow, we would have to be in condition red. There's no question about that. But the real problem with planning is the numbers that are being reported in the state are basically numbers from a week ago, because those people, if they are now testing positive for COVID, they were exposed perhaps a week or more ago. And so we are always trying to drive this, we're trying to drive this vehicle with a full delay on both the gas and the brakes. That makes it really hard to drive this. And so how can we go about making sure that our plans, that we have more clarity of where we are concerning yellow and red, because I don't think anybody is discussing about opening in green. So how are we communicating and make these expectations and these plans? I know it's there at our website, but this is something that I've really been getting a lot of email about from constituents, is, really asking for how can we get better clarity.
Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Smiley, I think everyone right now is hoping and wishing for a level of certainty, and we're in the most uncertain of times right now, and it's uncomfortable to have uncertainty, and I understand the concerns of parents and the staff and their desire to have a determination of how are we going to open, and we need to make plans, and I agree with all those things. The reality also is we're going to probably get fairly comfortable with the uncomfortable this year of moving between yellow and red, and that may happen throughout the year, moving back and forth between yellow and red, and we don't really, we're planning for a lot of the unknown in terms of how much that up and down may change, and I hope that it's not too much of a roller coaster. But I also, this idea, for example, of, I know a lot of you have received emails about delaying the decision until August 25th to make the decision about what category we're going to open in. That August 25th is 2 weeks before the start of the school year, and there are folks who want us to make that decision today. The reality is, as we move through the school year and we move through yellow and red, we're not going to be able to do a 2-week notice in those situations. If we go from yellow to red, we're going to have to be able to move relatively quickly. And again, I mentioned this before, at my own house, we're planning for how does my wife teach and my 2 elementary age children learn, and I continue to do my job. So we're all dealing with this uncertainty, and ultimately the board needs to make some of those decisions. The sooner we can give clarity to families that we know we're not opening in green, we are planning for a yellow and or a red, and that we're following those CDH recommendations. I think that helps to give some clarity. There was certainly some folks last week who felt uncertain on the intent behind changing the language to move the every other day scheduling idea into the red. Some uncertainty of what does that mean, and so as much as possible, we want our decision framework that we use as a district, as a school board, to have clarity. And so I would ask the board to also really consider the intent behind the changes that were made last week and make sure that we're really clear about the intent of those decisions, so that our families are also, and our staff and our students are really clear about when CDH makes a category recommendation change, what does that mean for West Ada?
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that, I think one thing that we can make clear is that I don't think anyone is even considering the possibility of opening up in green. Now the question is, we are going to be limiting contact. We are going to be doing a lot more remote learning. That is not even a question. It is the intensity of the level that I think is the only thing that we're seeking more clarity on. And that is something to where I think we owe it to our constituents to make sure that, it was pretty much my feeling that I don't think anyone was considering opening up school in level green. I think that we were all hoping that by the 8th of September, we would have more clarity in the numbers, whether they're going up, going down, the severity of these cases, et cetera, that we could make a more definitive determination as to where, if we open tomorrow, there is no question that we would be under red conditions. But, as somebody a lot smarter than me said, hope is not really a really good strategy. So I think that's one thing that I would hope that we could get more clarity on moving forward is that we are considering a lot more remote learning. How much remote learning? I think a lot of it has to be done on a case-by-case basis and also a school-by-school basis. The way that our schools are laid out, a lot of them are pretty consistent, but no two buildings are exactly alike. And that's going to affect a lot of our plans. And we have to rely a lot on our principals and a lot on their communications with parents and the district communication. We do have our plan, but I think this is an area that I don't know about the other members of the board, but I know that I've been getting more emails and communication on this topic than I have any other topic. I think, heck, even when I was in the legislature, the array of opinions and feelings from some people that say they want it opened up completely to other people says, how dare you even consider doing anything other than remote learning? I've never seen this array of input. So I think giving clarity is really important here.
Any other trustees with comment for Mr. Helen?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Ozuna.
Trustee Ozuna, please.
I guess I just wanted to clarify my intentions for supporting the decisions that were made with the language change to Category 2 and Category 3. I'll go with the easy one. In Category 2, yellow, if as a community we are in Category 2, we may have outbreaks at an individual school. There may be something that happens in a classroom. I mean, there might be reasons why we need to have a targeted school closure in yellow, and that gap was missing for me, and that's why I supported that change there. In Category red, it's really important that, well, first off, I want to say I'm not going to minimize safety. Safety comes first above all else. Absolutely. But in Category red, what we haven't seen as a board yet, and Trustee Johnson talked about this, but we don't know what the delivery mechanism is going to look like. We don't know yet how remote learning is going to go. We don't know how that's going to work for our students. And so my intention with supporting that new language in category 3 is to allow us to have some flexibility to get students back into the classroom if, and this is a big if, all of the safety mechanisms are in place to keep our students and our staff safe. So it's very dependent upon those building level plans, which, you know, we haven't seen any of them at the time that we had the meeting last week. Absolutely the use of masks, absolutely the hand washing stations and the social distancing and all of those components. But that was my intention in supporting that, is that it would give us some flexibility if all of our safety mechanisms are in there, are in place in a way that it'll keep our students and our staff safe and allow for some sort of a blended learning situation in that category 3 level. One big thing that is missing for me there, though, is what criteria and I think it's still missing, even if we're just following CDH recommendations entirely, but what's missing is what's the criteria that we're using to decide how to move between these levels? What criteria are we using next week to decide if we're opening 100% remote or if we're blended? What criteria would we use if we open 100% remote to potentially go into blended learning? What criteria are we using to decide if a CTE program can take place in a building? Mr. Heller, I don't know if you can speak to that, but I haven't seen that level of detail yet.
You know, if I can just interject real quick, I mean, on our agenda is really just an update. So we're not really kind of redebating the document at this point. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Chairman Klopfenstein and Trustee Ozuna, I agree with you, and I'll go back to this. There's not we don't have a formula. We, as a district, our recommendation going back to last week was that we would follow Central District Health recommendations in terms of which category are we in. Trustee Ozuna, I 100% agree. The addition of the targeted short-term or extended school closure with remote learning in the yellow category was an area that needed to be there in order to handle an individual school, potentially individual classroom situation where we need to, while our district is in category 2 yellow, we do need to shut a school down or a classroom down. So we definitely needed that change. It was a really strong change to make. I do think when you asked the question for me about how do we move between yellow or red or what criteria, my recommendation, I think our district recommendation is we're going to use Central District Health's recommendations to determine the category we are in. Where I believe we need some clarity, continue to be, is when we look at category 3 and red, we have an or there, and based on just some conversations tonight, it sounds like there is still some differences in terms of the reason for the or. The school buildings open, the staggered use of school buildings, physical distancing, the alternate day schedule idea in red. Whether that is purely going to be used for small groups of students in very targeted specific ways, or whether it's going to be for all of our students on an alternating day schedule in category 3. I think that difference is big. There's a pretty big gap between the difference between those two things. And so that piece of clarity is pretty important. And then once we have that, I think it'll help a little bit to get closer to how we would decide which to use in red. In terms of things like closing an individual building down, we have a pretty defined process that has been developed in collaboration with Central District Health. We have a COVID task force that would do the case investigation alongside Central District Health, and then they would give us some recommendations based on the investigation. Is it just individual students that didn't compromise other students in the classroom based on physical distancing, mask wearing, hand washing? And we would be able to make a recommendation to the board that we need to shut a school down, or we need to just send a certain group of students home for a few days. So those decisions are in the plan. I believe it's page 13 or 14. We actually have it in the frequently asked questions, have it broken down how that would work. But back to the original question, to decide if we're in yellow or if we're in red, I think our recommendation continues to be that we would utilize Central District Health for category determinations.
Thank you, Mr. Heller. Mr. Chairman, for our next meeting, can we certainly make sure that we have some additional discussion around this, because I think we're going to need it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Heller, one other thing about the mask. I just want to make sure that that I express that I 100% support the use of requiring masks. And I think that that's going to be a really important thing if we're able to put students back in our schools. What might we put in place to help with discipline if we have students that just aren't going to wear them? And I know that we have some that can't, so that's an exception. And we have special populations that it might be really difficult with. But what about students that just don't want to wear a mask? How do we communicate that if that's the case for a student, they might need to look at other plans like our virtual schoolhouse? Or how are we going to handle that in our buildings to make sure that the enforcement is there?
Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Ozuna, you really hit on the difficult nature that schools deal with all the time with different things. I think about immunizations and the requirements that are in, that are on students in Idaho public schools, and we are put in the position as being the notification and enforcement side of that, and to say that you can't be in schools unless you have these immunizations, and we have the process we deal with there. And then we have dress codes, and we have students on a regular basis who violate those types of things. And I think we're going to have different situations, as you outlined, students who can't for whatever reason, students who it's going to be difficult for based on whatever special circumstances that student is in or their family is in. And then we're going to have students who forget, and we have masks that will be ready for that student that forgets, and put the mask in their hand and get them back to class. And then we will have students who will, for lack of a better term, demonstrate levels of insubordination regarding the mask. I will say at that point, we're probably now talking more about the behavior of refusing to follow requirements in the building than we are about the mask itself. And we, like we do all the time, every day in every building across our district, we deal with those situations, and our goal in every one of those is always to resolve it in a way that gets the student back to school and back to class. And so, I will tell you that when we had the enrollment fair, we didn't have any students refusing to wear masks. We didn't have any, we had, I think, one parent who initially refused to wear a mask, and I believe they ended up putting one on as well. So I will say I trust again in the people in our buildings, our administrators, our counselors, our teachers are so skilled at working through these scenarios. And then we also know there's going to be some folks who are going to tell us, I can't, it's a medical issue. And we aren't really, there's no requirement right now with CDH that they have to produce a note. So there will be people who will use the medical reason as a reason why they can't. And we aren't going to be able to push much farther than just having a pretty simple conversation. So this isn't going to be an easy thing for us to deal with. But I also have a lot of confidence that our buildings are going to be able to navigate this, and we will deal with those really extreme situations in a case-by-case situation, and we will work with those families. And yeah, there might be families who strongly object to the masks, and we do encourage them to think about things like the virtual schoolhouse. But I would hate for everything we do with masks to go down a punitive road. I think we need to use every opportunity to educate and to work and partner with our families to make sure we're making the best decisions for their students.
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson.
Trustee Johnson.
Thank you. I would just echo that the same reasons that Trustee Ozuna felt comfortable with adding the additional language to the red category, I did too. I think we do have some difference of what that alternating day in school buildings open up means, so I appreciate the opportunity to have a larger discussion. I did have one last question for Mr. Heller, and I think there's a difference between what we're talking around now with a safety mechanism around masks as one of the safety medical professional recommended safety protocols than we do for, say, a dress code. So I guess what I would ask, and I want to kind of understand, I appreciate all the positivity in education, but in the end of the day, there's a larger risk to other students in this scenario than there are in some of those others. And so I want to ask this question in a different way because I think it helps kind of bridge some clarity. If we had a student in a welding class who refused to wear the welding hood, would we still let them use the welding equipment? And I think the answer is no. And so I think we have to really understand from a clarity purposes, what is the end? What do we need to put in place to make sure that barring a proven medical issue or something like that, what do we need to make sure that we put in place in order to make sure those safety protocols are followed in every one of our buildings, and administrators and principals and teachers have the capacity and ability to make sure that happens? I think that's the question I have.
Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Johnson, it's a great clarification that you made in that, yes, I mean, we do things like you mentioned in a welding class. There are very specific things that are non-negotiable for the student's safety, and that happens in a science lab as well. We in a PE class even at times, there you have to wear closed-toed shoes. We are going to do certain things to protect the student's safety. This is obviously at a larger level when it comes to virus transmission and those things. I will tell you, we've been having conversations with council regarding this, and we have been, and I know other districts probably have also received some guidance that we need to be cautious when we talk about handing out discipline consequences regarding a mask. But I also agree that there needs to be some very specific plans in place for the student who's refusing to wear that mask and then potentially putting other students at risk. And so I guess I'd love to hear what the board believes would be, a direction they would like to see that go. It's definitely, this is one of the trickiest situations we've ever dealt with. As you mentioned, the welding mask, the student refusing to wear the welding mask, the student sits out and doesn't weld that day, and typically that resolves itself. Us sequestering students and removing their opportunity for education in the building because of the refusal to wear a mask starts to go down a maybe a little bit trickier road that we need to be careful as we navigate that. I think it's something we can continue to work on, and I'm happy to hear if there's any recommendations the board would make on ideas we can pursue, and we'll continue to talk to legal counsel about that as well.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Heller, I would recommend we look at what Valley View School District is doing in that regard. I think they've been pretty clear up front what's required, and if the requirements are not something that people choose to meet, that they have other options available to them. That's one spot to look. I think another is as an example that businesses are using, like a Costco. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I think we'll probably close the discussion on this at this point, unless other trustees need to answer what Mr. Heller was talking about, and move on to our CIP goals. So do we, Troy, do you have the 1920 board goals available? I have them on my computer, but yeah, very good. If you just roll down to that portion of it. a little more right there. So trustees, this is the CIP area that we own is the goal area number 1, which is our goals. And to make sure we reach our state mandated deadline, which is, I believe, in the beginning of October, we need to make sure that we kind of review the goals we've had and then also create a series of new goals. And we can keep the ones we have, keep these goals, and then include these in the next CIP document. And this document is required by the state, because we're now part of that document, which is what we approved last year, that we'll need to continue being part of that document with an update. So we can continue with these, or we could make changes to these. And I'd love to hear board feedback at this point, what you'd be interested in doing, if you'd like to keep them, or if you'd like to move on with something different. Obviously, right now COVID is going to be quite big and possibly big for the rest of the year. So I'd be quite curious to see what your perspective is. Does anyone wish to start?
Mr. Chairman, I'll start. This is Trustee Ozuna.
Trustee Ozuna, please, you have the floor.
I think clearly this year, a huge change for us is going to be around delivering effective remote learning. So I'd like to see a goal around that in our document.
Excellent. Do you have any language by chance?
No, I don't.
Okay. Anyone else with a suggestion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson. I actually have a question.
Please.
Because I'm pleasantly reminded very regularly about the board's role to govern and the district's role to operate. So I wanted to know, how does something like a remote learning play with the district's goals? Do we set these and then they build strategies to support them? How does that interplay work together, I guess, is my question.
These would be our goals. So these are the goals that I'm sorry, there's an echo. I'm sorry, would you mind killing I keep hearing myself. Thank you. These basically are our goals, and these are the goals that we have to kind of guide us within the year. For instance, this year we had kind of understanding what our goal is for monitoring and supporting HRS within the district. Understanding policy changes for maybe reaching out to the community for more engagement, or for the legislature for trying to help with understanding of funding, things like that. That was our goals, and it's really what the goal of the board is interested in doing and planning for this year. So it's going to be board goals only. Does that make sense?
It does, except for I think a piece of the puzzle is missing for me, and that's what are the district's goals for 2020-2021 school year? Did I miss that in something that I've received, or are those still being developed as well?
Those are actually throughout the rest of the document. So we have goal area 1, and that's our goals. And then the district goals are throughout the rest of the document.
Chairman Klopfenstein and Trustee Johnson, if I can interject.
Mr. Yellow, please.
So at the next board meeting, we would be bringing forward the 3 continuous improvement templates that are required by the state as part of our continuous improvement plan. And those will include our student achievement goals, the specific areas of the continuous improvement plan around those goals. And then the document where your board of trustee goals live is in a document that's called the CIP additional document. And that is a document that's not required by the state of Idaho, but that we have had for the last few years in our continuous improvement plan, and includes the board of trustees goals. And so what you'll notice when I bring the templates forward at the next meeting is that most of our goals, especially around academic achievement, are going to look very similar to the ones that were in the 1920 CIP, because we didn't have end of year assessments this year due to COVID. And so a lot of our goals remain the same. And so if you do want to refer to the 1920 documents that you have on the website, a lot of what you're going to see when I present the new templates will be very similar, which may help to inform trustees in terms of what goals are going to look like. And again, I will get those templates to you well in advance of your next board meeting so that you can review those templates for that meeting. And then just allow you guys to think about what your goals are today. It would be really helpful as we work through our process to have everything as required by code updated by October 1st.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I think I would echo support for some sort of encouragement or monitor. I don't know what the language is, but something around online. But to this, I would add some additional kind of color to it. And I think one of the benefits of any sort of technology in our educational system as a support is that it allows us the ability to really hone in and personalize to a student. So I would kind of add to that online language in some way that we talk about how we use it to personalize and engage. Is support teachers in the ability to personalize and engage the educational curriculum.
Thank you. Did other trustees have goals that they'd like to pursue this year, or would you like to keep the rest of the same?
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Smiley.
you know, I cannot let this opportunity pass. I was going through Idaho Ed News from the last time we had the spring testing. And this is, I'm just going to read it because this was August of 2019. And it says, and I'll quote, "A round of applause goes to West Ada. Only 4 of the 10 largest districts performed better than the state average in read-it. West Ada was the top performer of the 10 largest districts in reading. Statewide English and math scores improved from the previous years, but science scores dropped. West Ada outperformed large districts in all categories. West Ada's superintendent, Mary Ann Reynolds, was Idaho's Superintendent of the Year. West Ada's per pupil expenditure is among the lowest in the state." I don't get a chance to pat what our people are doing very often, but you know, at least we are starting from a very, very strong position. And it is my intention as a board member to continue doing exactly what we have been doing. We're going to have challenges, to be sure, but I feel pretty good about what we have set up, and I just have to say something positive. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Trustee Newhoff, did you have any ideas for that you'd like to pursue, or you'd like to keep the current?
Yeah, I guess I have a sort of a procedural question. Maybe Mr. Heller can help address this. As part of the SIP document that we're preparing this year, are we supposed to review our progress towards the goals that were in the previous year's document?
Thank you, Trustee Klopfenstein, Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Newhoff. There is language in the CIP additional that does have exactly what you're referencing, which is progress towards your goals. And so an evaluation, if you will, of how the board felt like they did in meeting or working towards the goals that they have set. And we do the same thing for the other goals that are throughout that CIP document. So yes, I think it's a good place potentially for this group to start, is talking about the 4 goals that you have set and how you felt those goals were, how effective you felt like those goals were this year and progress towards them. And then I guess if those goals continue to be areas of need, then maybe an encouragement to maintain those specific goals, and then it sounds like there are some ideas of some added considerations. I would say, you know, the discussion about effective teaching in every classroom, even in remote. Goal number 1 with high reliability schools and its role in monitoring and supporting HRS and tracking district success. As you know, all of our buildings are have done the process of certifying in the level 1, the safe and collaborative schools. But our next role is moving into that effective teaching in every classroom, and this is going to be an interesting year for that because effective teaching in a remote world is different in some ways than effective teaching in a physical or face-to-face instructional world. So there is some value with goal number 1 that continues to be an area that we're going to be focusing. Our focus hasn't changed, so we may have a different timeline for achieving all of our schools working through that HRS level 2 process. But certainly conversations or language around supporting remote learning and effective teaching in a remote learning world is an appropriate thing for the board to continue to talk about.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I guess I kind of want to just briefly revisit the history here, partly for Trustee Johnson's edification, because she wasn't part of this process. We set these goals in our advance last year, and each of these areas was there was a trustee or a pair of trustees that was in charge of each of these areas, or was taking the lead on them. And at some point last fall, I believe, we started to have a discussion and a workshop about where we're at with them. And so I don't know what the most efficient way of sort of addressing where we're at, and kind of as Mr. Heller just said, whether there's more progress we want to make towards one or all of these goals, or obviously, certainly I think Mr. Heller was right on that the discussion about online learning kind of dovetails a lot with number 1. So I don't know what how operationally you'd want to go about this, Mr. Chairman, but I mean, perhaps we ought to just kind of briefly go through each one and say, and particularly if the person's here who is leading it, where we think we're at with regards to what we're trying to do with each of these goals.
Trustee Newhoff, I really appreciate that. One of the challenges, obviously, we have in reviewing these, and not just for Trustee Johnson, but we didn't really go over these, and we really didn't have much of a board advance this year either. And so the discussion time we have on these is going to be rather thin. I totally think we definitely should, and we really can and should talk about how we how we performed on these. Obviously, there's going to be some areas where it's just things got derailed in February, March time. But yeah, I'd love to do that. I think that would be a really valuable discussion. I think for HRS, it was actually me and possibly Mike. Since Mike's not here, then I could probably address that first, if that would be okay. And then understanding core issues. Do you remember Trustee Newhoff who had that? I'm a little vague on that.
My guess would be it was Trustee Ozuna, but she would have to speak up.
Thanks, Trustee Newhoff. I was on mute, and understanding core issues was my area, and we have a lot of work to still do around this one. Some of the work that we've already outlined, though, with creation of the protocols and the board calendar, some of these new policies that we're putting in place are going to help with that. But this is a big one that I think we need to leave on here.
Excellent. Thank you. Let me start with the high reliability schools. I mean, one of the things that we were looking to do was try to greater participation in some of the meetings, and just to have a board member kind of follow what the different schools were doing and just get an overall taste of HRS. I felt like we did a pretty good job last year. I went to one event with Mr. Myers and some other staff, and we were planning to go on another event this year, but obviously things got derailed. I think it was Mr. Smiley and I were looking to go to that event. So, I mean, we definitely tried, and I think our perspective on HRS has definitely improved. There's a lot more to do, obviously, with that as well. I think the biggest thing to understand is how remote, and it may be, Trustee Ozuna, you may want to consider that the kind of understanding effective remote learning might be a part of HRS, and that we would have to adjust HRS to support that. And that might be an area of interest that we could just fold into the school. So as far as number 3, effective community engagement, I'm assuming this was either was Trustee Wietene, former Trustee Wietene, or Trustee Smiley.
No, this is me.
Oh, I beg your pardon, Trustee Newell, excuse me.
Yeah, so we had a discussion about the ability of the board to be able to communicate with their constituent groups, and there are a lot of situations where that's, I think, a useful thing. One good example is when we need volunteers for curriculum committees or textbook committees or various things that come up. But there were other situations too, and so one of the things that got put in place with the help of Mr. Exline was the development of a mailing list capability that allowed the board to send an email that in most cases was targeted only at constituents in their zones. There's apparently some technical issues associated with tracking addresses in Blackboard and some of the other apps we're using. But we did use it last fall I think to some success. And there are certainly some technological and other things that we could improve with it. But of the issues on here, I think this is the one that probably is the least important, given where we're at with it now, to kind of move on, or to kind of continue on as a goal, because I think we've got a lot of other fish to fry here. But anyway.
Yeah, and I believe also you had reached out to several of the other municipalities, I believe like Star and Eagle for yourself. We reached out to Mr. Smiley, or Trustee Smiley and I reached out to Meridian. And so we did definitely kind of make some face-to-face time. We were trying to pull in Mayor McLean over in Boise, but obviously she's got her hands tied with what's going on over there. But we did try. So it was I thought it was a very effective year for number 3, unless you feel different.
Well, I mean, it's something we're always going to have to work on, right? Like any of these, but you know.
Absolutely.
Where I see we're at.
Thank you. Trustee Smiley, I assume you were number 4.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Just to give you a little bit of feedback, during the legislative session, I testified in the legislature at least 3 different times, and 1 different time on an area that had to do with state parks. I did also meet one of the success stories. We met with Senator Martin, and there was a bill that was before his committee that would have been deleterious to the district. And a result of that meeting, and also the way he viewed the issue as well, that bill never did get a hearing, and he was able to keep that that particular bill from moving forward, even after it had passed the House. So we did have some successes. I'm not going to say that we don't have more work to do. I encouraging people to vote. I've tried to do some communications on our bond impact. Here again, not with complete success. It is a real challenge. And I know that this is something that communicating with our patrons is something that I think with our new communications officer, this is going to be a challenge moving forward. I think we need to continue to talk about funding. I think we need to continue to just lay out the facts. We have a very important bond election. I've been trying to communicate, not advocating for or against the passage of this bond, but I think it's on all of us to say these are the reasons why we approved. Of course, how you vote is up to you, but this is why we came up with this conclusion and why we are putting this issue before the voters. We as board members can say that and communicate that, and I hope all of us are whenever we have the opportunity to do so. So I guess the report back on the legislative and funding here in the last few months, I've had an opportunity to meet with Mayor Simison, with Chairman Kloppenstein. I also met individually with Mayor McLean and our new Chief of Police, Ryan Lee. So those are areas that I can report some progress on. And actually, the dialogue that we had with all three of those meetings, I felt was really positive. And we will continue to make those activities. So I guess we haven't performed miracles, but we've been working on it.
Trustee Smiley, do you think leaving number 4 in place would be a good thing?
I do. Because I think that especially because there are members of the legislature that represent West Ada that are chairmen of pretty important committees. And reaching out to them, I had a meeting actually last summer when I met with Representative Moyle and the other Republican representatives that represent us in a forum meeting. And I took the time to, say, I'm here, I can answer questions, can we work together? And I did get some feedback. It wasn't 100% positive, but it was a positive relationship. And I believe I met with them it was an open forum that was not particularly well attended. So I took the opportunity afterwards to go up and talk with each member individually. So it's a continuing challenge. Whenever there's an open forum, whenever there's a community meeting, I do my best to be there. One of our problems is that the city council meetings and the board meetings are on the same night, and that makes it more of a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. But thank you very much for that report, and really thank you for all your efforts. I know back in the legislative period, you were spending a lot of time over in the state capitol.
It's an area that I sort of know the back rooms.
Yes, you do. Trustee Newhoff, just curious. So you think dropping effective community engagement would be a wise thing?
I don't have strong feelings one way or the other, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
If there's some other emerging issue, that could be one that we could drop, or we could keep it. It's still important, and there's still a lot of work to be done on it. It's just, I think we need to say where we're at, which I think we kind of just did, and decide if these are the same things we want to focus on.
Absolutely. And what I was trying to get back to is in other words, do we keep 4 or do we move on to 5? And Trustee Ozuna, you had made reference to an effective remote learning goal. And do you think that should be wrapped into one of these, or do you think we should make a fifth goal?
You know, Mr. Chairman, with high hopes, maybe we could have that as a fifth goal. High reliability schools will likely stay with us for, carry on. It might carry on, and we can all hope that remote learning might drop off next year. How's that for high hopes?
That would be amazing high hopes. As far as effective remote learning, would you be able to come up with a quick sentence? I mean, if you want to do a fifth, because I have to admit, Trustee Newhoff, the effective community engagement, I almost see that it's almost more imperative now than ever. Unless you feel differently.
No, I mean, I agree. I think it is. I think it is too, and I think that there's a lot of other angles that we can take towards it with reaching out to our, like the Chambers of Commerce and a bunch of other organizations in our community that we can work on. I mean, if I'd be perfectly happy with sort of keeping these same goals and working towards them. I'm working beyond where we've been. That wasn't what I was saying. So I don't know what other people's view about that is, but I think we need to say where we've been and where we're going if we're going to do that, and and come up. I guess we have to come up with some sort of metric or something, to say whether we've met our goal. I mean, right? I mean, these are goals; they're not just activities, right? So
exactly, yes.
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Ozuna.
Trustee Ozuna.
Thank you. For number 3, with the effective community engagement, my recollection of that was really it was the creation of the mechanism to communicate with all of our constituents in a trustee zone. There are some limitations to that because of the way that our zones work. But like Trustee Newhoff said, with Mr. Exline's help, a tool was created to allow us to get that communication out. So if we keep this as a goal, I think we should change it, because now it's not so much how are we going to communicate, but what is it that we're communicating and how are we engaging with the community?
That's very, very good.
And just to add, with the new census data, our trustee zones will be changed.
Good point. So what I'd like to do, Trustee Johnson, I'm curious, is there an area where you'd like to cover? So if we had 5 different goals instead of 4, that means there's an area here where we don't have to double up on an area. I mean, we obviously could, one trustee could take more than one goal, but is there an area here that you would like to own?
You know what, Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. I don't know. I think I'm open to whatever works for everyone. Like, I think if there's consistency needed for consistency's sake, I'd also like to kind of understand what the ownership means, because I could see some efforts being needed with multiple support in a number of these. So that'd be helpful to understand.
Well, I think going back to what Trustee Newhoff said, if we actually apply a metric, so we're not just talking about the goal like we did this year, but we're also saying, well, obviously Trustee Newhoff has a specific metric in his as well, but we actually have a more specific metric for each one of them. And instead of being a little more less general and being more specific, that would probably be where we want to focus. So each person would then say, this is where we're roughly going to hit this year. This is our goal, and then be basically be the owner of that goal, and to be able to hit that target. Does that make sense, Trustee Johnson?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Yeah, I think I need to think about your question. I'm sorry, I think I need to have a little time to think about that.
Okay, so we have high reliability schools. So this is mine. I'll go ahead and start. So we have high reliability schools, professional learning communities. What we had for this year was the board will determine its role in monitoring and supporting HRS and how to track district success. I would frankly suggest that this gets changed, and I would frankly like to continue to own this, and to be able to say that that we monitor HRS during the period of COVID or during the next year, and report back at least twice to the board about progress within the district for HRS. Would that be a fair goal?
That sounds good to me. This is Trustee Johnson.
Thank you, Trustee Johnson. Trustee Smiley, do you think that would be a fair goal?
I agree. I think that this is an ongoing thing. You and I both attended the conference in Denver, and I came out with a lot of good ideas out of that conference. I think that it's a good thing to show some consistency. I don't think that high reliability schools is the only model out there. I always worry a little bit about the danger of only having read one book. There's other people besides Marzano, but his framework is a good one. I'm not sure if we're ever going to get to level 4 and 5, but I think the idea of levels 1 through 3 are good goals, and ones that we should continue working on. Of course, this remote learning is really going to be a challenge, and it's something we're going to have to work our way through. I've heard Superintendent Reynolds mention this, and I think that there were a number of principals that said they were kind of disappointed that they didn't get some of the assessments in the spring, because they were confident that their schools were going to hit it out of the park. So, this is something we'll have a challenge. It's going to take some time, and it's going to take some effort to re-engage. And I think that we need to make sure that this is why we exist, to deliver quality educational services to every child, whatever medium we use.
Thank you very much. Trustee Newhoff, do you think that would be a fair goal to pursue for number 1?
I do, and I think, I agree with basically everything that Trustee Smiley just said. And I think, when you have a time of stress or crisis like we're in right now, it allows you to really go in and evaluate.
Absolutely.
Meeting the intent of something like HRS. I mean, safe and supportive schools means something entirely different to us now than it did 2 years ago.
Absolutely right.
And I'm meaning that beyond virus transmission. I mean, I think we've learned things about the nature of the students we're serving, and the digital divide, and other needs that they have. And so, I would like, as part of that, to kind of sit there and think about that, about where we've been back in, level 1 and level 2, and whether we've learned something there that, when, we're past this crisis, which hopefully we will be at some point, that we can use this experience to improve operations long term. So anyway, I think your idea is good.
Thank you very much. And Trustee Ozuna, Do you think that's a fair goal to pursue?
Yes, I do support that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, I'm ending with you because we're starting with understanding core issues, which I believe was yours. So would you like to pursue this particular goal, or would you like to create a separate one for effective remote learning?
Yes, no, I can keep this. I think that it's fine as written. Like I mentioned, there's a few policies that we're going through. I think our protocols could fit under this category. I think that our board calendar helps with the.
Is there a particular goal that you'd like to, like a metric that you'd like to define?
Well, I think the metric would be, did we create our policies? Did we create the calendar? We do need to outline our protocols as a board. And those are the big ones if we want to put those on there.
Can I suggest and maybe the other trustees may want to chime in on this, but just choose one as the top priority, and then if there might be others, then we include those. Is that a fair request? Or am I putting on the spot?
I think that how about the board calendar? Because I think that will largely drive some of these other things.
Wonderful. That's an excellent choice.
The creation of the calendar.
Super. Trustee Newhoff, is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Trustee Smiley, does that make sense for a goal?
Right. Yeah. I think that all of those are important. I think the timelines, policies, procedures, it's kind of a checklist, but I have trouble identifying any one that is more important than the others. I think as board members, those all come within our purview.
Wonderful, thank you. And Trustee Johnson, do you think that's fair to pursue?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you very much. For item number 3, effective community engagement, Trustee Newhoff, do you think would you like to change some of that language to maybe a metric?
I think it has to do with what our goals are. I appreciate Trustee Azuna saying what I probably should have said about is that we did set last year, for instance, this one specific action item, which was coming up with a way to email our patrons, and we've got that. It can be improved, but I think if I was to set a couple goals in this regard, I think it'd be 2 things come to mind right away. One is using that email system or some other method to keep our community engaged, particularly this year when I don't think we're going to be adopting any textbooks and some of the other things that we used that for a lot last year. I mean, just for budget reasons, I would be kind of shocked if we were going to go through some of those processes. And so I think, having some goal like, once a quarter or something that every trustee finds some way to reach out specifically to their patrons would be one. The other kind of plays off some comments that you made, Mr. Chairman. I think that we don't have sort of equal interface with particularly our municipal partners across the district. I think we have a lot of dialogue with Meridian, and this is probably on me. We haven't had nearly as much with for instance, Star and Eagle or CUNA, and Trustee Smiley brought up Boise, and we have Garden City, and we have the counties and everything. And so some goals surrounding developing at least yearly, maybe more often than that, some sort of board interaction with our municipal partners all across the district, I think would be a good goal there.
Mr. Chairman, I
Trustee
would
Smith?
concur with that. I would concur. I think that is an area, for example, on area 4, I was going to suggest that it just not only be with the legislative, but as we've discovered with planning and zoning, with the cities, and I might add the county. I learned that today I learned that the percentage students in West Ada with a Boise mailing address was a higher percentage than what I realized. It's up around 27%. I thought it was closer to 20. So those numbers kind of surprised me today.
So you would be, Trustee Smiley, you would be okay taking on, I mean, this sounds like an entire board, not owned by just one individual member, but the entire board would pursue one action a quarter.
Yeah, I think that, reaching out, there have been a couple of areas to where it has been necessary for us to reach out to city council members. I can foresee that, positive dialogue with county commissioners, other county officials. I think it is something that each of us in our zones has a very, very unique, responsibility. Indeed, you could argue that each of our trustee zones is almost the size of a state of Idaho legislative district. We incorporate 4 legislative districts, part of 5, just in West Ada. So the population numbers are very daunting, and our responsibility as board members is very daunting. We simply can't get into a lot of the minutia, but all kinds of relationships are there, and that gives us each as trustees a lot of work to do. And we all volunteer for this job. And, the one thing to keep in mind, none of us are going to be here forever. I doubt that in 10 years, unless some of you have some really long range plans, 10 years from now, the board's going to be made up of completely different people. And, as we make these plans and goals, we have to understand the transitory nature of our positions.
Well, if we want to be philosophical, transitory nature of life.
True that.
But it's just for the 1 year. So we're just looking for a small time frame.
Yes.
But I appreciate
I think that adding either to goal 3 or to goal 4, not just legislative, but city and county level, and there's been some cases where we've had to get along and interact with other boards as well.
Sure.
When we deal with, like, for example, Centric District Health. Who would have thought that we needed to have a better relationship with Central District Health? Now that becomes very important.
Yes, it does. Trustee Johnson, did you have any perspective on this?
Maybe, yeah. So let me make sure, which one are we talking about, 3 and 4, or 3 or just 3?
At this point, we're talking about number 3. So the idea was that we would have 2 items. One is that we'll have each trustee reach out every quarter to patrons, have some sort of either an event or some sort of engagement of some sort, and then report that back to the board, and then have possibly every year some sort of interaction with the wider municipal community that we are partnered with.
Okay. Yeah. I guess I would encourage us on the metric for the wider community engagement, that each trustee reach out to the legislators and the municipalities that are in their zone, and just have at least 1 contact a year. I would go for more, but I think at a minimum, at least 1 contact a year. I'm not sure that how much we're able to do that today. So I would encourage that metric. I like it.
Wonderful, thank you. To Trustee Newhoff, do you think that's a good goal to reach? Is that too strong a goal?
I think we should be able to do it, and it's worth setting the goal and trying to achieve it, I think.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. So that brings us into item number 4 was the legislative funding impact and legislative and funding impact, which is Trustee Smiley's goal. And so Trustee Smiley, you were saying that you would like to maybe grow this a little bit and have not just yourself, but other trustees support this as well. Is that correct?
Yes, I would concur, because the first thing that any legislator does, they know the zip codes of their legislative districts. And when they get an email or a letter from a constituent and they show their zip code, that letter gets read. If it's some other zip code, it goes to the bottom of the pile.
Mm.
So, that is one area, but the real challenge is that none of those boundaries, none of the zip code boundaries, none of the city boundaries, none of that intersect. I think, my zone 3 is a classic example, because the line in that trustee zone right now is Eagle Road, which includes both City of Boise, City of Meridian, and when you get across the freeway, for Trustee Johnson, that goes all the way to the edge of Kuna. So that makes it difficult. I know that when I represented District 15 in the legislature, it was maddening, because I had to deal with City of Boise, City of Meridian, and even the irrigation districts and the mosquito control districts didn't line up. It was very frustrating.
So if we had a goal for your number 4, where every trustee during the year reaches out to one legislative contact within their zone, the people who are responsible within their zone, and just do one.
Yeah.
Do you think that would be a fair goal?
I think just sending out a letter saying, I'm here, please contact me if you want to talk about issues, because, the legislature, right now, life is pretty quiet unless they have a contested, election campaign, and then they're trying to get out their signs and everything like that. But then from January through, the March or April, whenever the legislature adjourns, it is chaos. So the time you build those relationships is, in November and December, during that quiet time. That's when it's most effective. And because it's something, just letting people know that you're there. And because we have so many legislative districts that are in the West Ada district, and making sure that we've at least let them know that we are here. I think that's really important. I know that I did that every year with the legislators in both District 15 and District 20. I had more success in 15 than I did in 20, because that's my old district, and perhaps also a reflection on the people that hold those offices. But it's an important job. And I do know that's how, it's just like with us, when we get a letter from a constituent and we can tell from the address, oh, that's in our zone, we generally respond more quickly to those requests than we do ones that just are sort of generic, to whom it may concern type letters.
Yeah, I have to admit, I don't. I don't look for this, but thank you. So if I can just go through and just confirm, Trustee Newhoff, do you think that would be a fair goal?
Yeah, I do.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Trustee Johnson, you comfortable with that?
Yes.
Yeah, for you, probably an easy one as well. Trustee Ozuna, would you be comfortable with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Then as far as Trustee Ozuna, as far as the goal you had suggested, would you like to pursue that as a 5th? Or would you like to wrap that up in something else?
I don't have a preference.
Okay.
And I'm also okay leaving it off if others want to leave it off. I know that it's going to be something that's, you know, going to definitely be on our radar, whether it's here or not.
What would your metric be as far as that goal if we did have it as a fifth?
Mr. Chairman, I'm actually not quite sure.
Okay. Would anyone else like to chime in? Oh, I beg your pardon?
No, please go ahead. Thank you.
Well, I was just wondering, as far as effective remote learning, I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure myself, but Trustee Newhoff, did you have an idea that you were looking at? Or Trustee Smiley, you have your mic off. Were you going to say something?
No, I'm good, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Johnson.
Yeah, this is Trustee Johnson. I think I have something, and it's a thinking out loud up for discussion. But one of the things that's going to happen as we start to roll this out is we're going to find throughout the process this year that some things work and some things don't. And so I think there'd be some value in having a board member with the district working through what's working and what's not, so that we can make sure our policies and how we're supporting that is really well informed and that we adjust. So I guess when I think about effectiveness, I think about making sure that for remote learning, it's around supporting the models that would be required from a staffing, training, and professional development perspective, and what the board needs to do in order to support that, as well as from the engagement and technology. And so I think it's more of a support role in this one because we're not the delivery or of operations, but we do need to have some ability to pivot quickly and figure out how to support where we have gaps. And we're going to find some, because that's just the nature of doing something new like this. So that's where I would encourage maybe some language that we support, agilely support remote learning and district needs as they develop the roadmap for remote learning and adjust throughout the year, something along those lines.
So in essence, that person would be the board expert, self-appointed expert.
Yeah, I maybe would call them the connection point, but yeah, I hope we'll all get some expertise. Yeah.
Well, you're gaining the knowledge from the district and then passing that back onto the board, whoever that would be.
Yeah, I just technology is a new animal for everybody, and I think we're gonna need to be really good at being candid about what's working and what's not working, and what we need to do to make sure we can adjust and help support the changing needs.
Excellent. Would that be something everyone's open to? Trustee Newhoff?
Yeah, I mean, some of the devil will be in the details. I mean, if this is like a board appointed committee thing, there are considerations there that'll have to be worked through. But we don't have any strong feelings against it. I mean, I think it's a good idea.
Excellent, thank you. Trustee Smiley?
Excuse me, my mic was off, my bad. I pretty much concur with the discussion we've had.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Trustee Ozuna, would you like to head this one?
That's fine, or Trustee Johnson can have it.
Okay.
Because I have core issues, but either way, I'm fine with. And I support it. I think that it's a great idea the way that she worded that.
Yeah, and just to comment about Trustee Newhoff's this wouldn't be a committee, and so it's just one person making sure they're keeping up on top of current issues. That's all. Yeah, just because we would have some pretty severe guidelines we'd have to follow for having an actual board committee. Excellent. Okay, so that would give us 5 goals for the year. Is everyone comfortable with those? Clerk Newbold, do you need us to repeat the language for those?
Chairman Klopfenstein, I would rather you write this down because I have found in the past that that's the best way.
Excellent. So
Thank
would
you.
everyone like to, we have that as an action item for this evening. So would each person responsible for their area, would they please write these up? We can get about 10 minutes if that's okay. And take a small break in between, and then present those as the as our final action item. Would that be fair? So let's just take a 10-minute break, write up our area's goals, and make sure you send those over to Clerk Newbold, if you would, please. And we'll reconvene at 8:40. So trustees, it's 8:40 now. Was everyone able to, Clerk Newbold, were you able to receive all the goals as written?
I'm just sending it right now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't know, there was a little bit of back and forth there on the new goal, so I took a stab at it, but if somebody else had some language, I'm by all means open to it.
Okay. I appreciate you jumping in. Clerk Newbold, did you receive my my item for number 1?
Chairman Klopfenstein, I did, and I'm forwarding them to Troy as well.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
My bad. I just sent mine.
Okay. Give me just a second and I'll have them all done.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Trustees, if we can just go to item 5 real quick. Is this what everyone was thinking? Either option 1 or 2. I'm not sure which one the board would prefer.
Mr. Chairman, the difference is the last sentence, and I just wasn't sure how to word the language so that we didn't create a committee, but we created that connection point. So, on
Okay.
the metric.
Yes, thank you. Trustee Smiley, do you have a perspective on option number 5 or item number 5?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'm just now.
Well, I'll chime in. Actually, I guess I'm all about simplicity, so it's got one sentence shorter, so I'd probably go for option 1. But yeah, just it seems very straightforward to me. I'd go for option number 1 myself.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a problem. The little dialogue screen is blocking out option number 2 on my screen. I have to.
If you click the image or the display outside of that little dialogue, then you'll see the whole image.
Got it.
Trustee Newhoff, any thoughts?
No strong ones. I mean, mean, I see where you're going. I mean, I think I like the second option has some kind of definable metric to it. I don't know how practical it's going to be. I mean, that's kind of a discussion to have with the administration, I guess. I don't. I'd be good either way, though.
Would it be fair, kind of like how we're doing with HRS and with some of these others, just to have a twice a year or maybe once a quarter, because this is kind of a little more timely, report back to the board, and that becomes the metric?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I do not feel comfortable with choosing one or the other of those options right now. I need a little bit of time. My first feeling is I kind of like option one a little bit better, but I don't have strong feelings on either one.
Excellent, thank you. So are you feeling uncomfortable with the goal as it stands, just irregardless of
Mr. Chairman, I like the goal. As this new blended learning model rolls out, I think it behooves all of us to keep on top of it. If one particular trustee wants to take the lead on that, I have no problem with that, but I just don't have a strong preference with option one or option two. That's where I am.
Excellent, thank you
I
very
can
much.
live with either.
Okay, then Trustee Ozuna, I'm assuming what is your perspective?
I'm fine with either. I don't necessarily think that we need to have the metric line in there, but I'm okay if we leave it.
Excellent, okay. Then Trustee Johnson, I guess choose which one you'd like to move forward, and we'll bring it to the whole board for review.
Okay. Well, I liked your suggestion, Mr. Chairman, of using the same metric that we were using for high reliability, but adding a couple because it's a bigger. So I actually would, let's choose option one, and I don't see a metric in high reliability schools. We would just add that later to mirror up the language and just do it quarterly instead of semi-annually.
Exactly, yeah.
Yep, I like that.
Awesome, thank you. Okay,
I can live with that.
Wonderful, thank you. So Troy, it sounds like we'll go with option one, but just add the metric of meeting or hearing a report each quarter. So does any trustees have any anything they'd like to say against any of these? And if not, then we'll move into the action portion. So let's move then into the action portion of the agenda. And item number one was discussion or was approval of 501. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question before motions?
Absolutely.
I think we talked about going to a fourth reading. Do we need a motion for that, or do we just not have an action on it?
We have an action item, so it would need to be tabled to the next meeting if that's what the board chooses.
Okay. Then, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we that policy 501.50 go through a fourth reading process and come back to the board when ready.
Well, that would mean it come back to the board the next meeting. Is that what you're intending? I just want to make sure I'm understanding the motion.
I actually go for 2 meetings just because I think we're going to have plenty on the August 25th meeting, but that's so I guess I would move that it comes back to the meeting, 2 regularly scheduled meetings from now, or the second. So not the next one, but the one after. I don't know the date is.
I apologize.
Chairman?
Yes, Clerk Newbold, yes.
I would just advise maybe just tabling the motion, and then that would be something we could discuss on the next agenda.
Okay, that's perfect.
I would agree.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll reword my motion. I move that we table item number 1, revised policy 501.50, school attendance zone.
Thank you very much for that motion. Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman, could I make a friendly amendment?
Absolutely.
This is Trustee Newhoff. I think the proper thing to do is to table it for a time certain. Otherwise, we're just tabling it indefinitely. So I would offer a friendly amendment that we add the language to a time certain to the motion to table.
Yep, and Mr. Chairman, I don't think we need to add a friendly amendment. That was my intent, so I just didn't say the words. So it'd be tabled. The motion is, let me restate it for Sherry. I would move that we revise policy 501.50, or that we table revised policy 501.50 for time certain, the school attendance zone policy.
Okay, I think we already had a motion on the table, so I think to do it correctly, we'd probably want to have the friendly amendment. So if you would, just if you would agree with Trustee Newhoff, you have to accept the friendly amendment.
Okay.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Point of order. Point of order.
Smiley.
Yes,
Trustee Smiley.
because the motion has not been seconded, it's not officially on the table until it's been seconded.
Thank you very much. My apologies. So you rephrasing the motion then would be fine then. Thank you very much, Trustee Smiley. So I'm sorry, if you would just rephrase for the record just one more time. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Sure. I move that we table revised policy 501.50 for a time certain, the school attendance zone policy.
Thank you very much. Is there a second on this policy? On this motion?
Second.
Trustee Newhoff with the second. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Ozuna.
Trustee Ozuna, please.
I'm okay with the table time uncertain. However, we do have the new high school opening, so I just want to make sure that we're not going to delay the creation of the process that needs to start this fall while we wait for this policy to be approved.
Yes, in fact, actually, thank you very much. And actually, it's a really good point. As far as whether it goes for next meeting or later, it's something we would have to be reaching out to Mr. Heller about. But it's my understanding that our process starts in early September, and that we would start choosing people for our permanent committee. So we are time pressed. But anyway, is there any other discussion on this motion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson. I guess I would just say that I think that we outlined for the most part what we already do with our permanent committee, short of inviting the municipalities. So I would hope that regardless of the timing, we still follow kind of I think we outlined pretty much what we already do today on that section.
If we introduce a change in policy, after the district has already started the process, then it might create some problems for the district, especially if what they're doing is going to be quite different from what our policy is. So, any other discussion? So let's move to a motion for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 And Chairman is aye as well, so it's unanimous. That brings us to item number 2, board goals. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Ozuna.
Trustee Ozuna, please.
I would move that we approve the board goals for the 2021 school year for the zip document.
Thank you very much for that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Trustee Johnson with the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 And Chairman is aye as well. Did I hear a fourth aye in there? I think I heard Trustee Johnson. Trustee Ozuna, did I hear you? Is there any no's? Oh, you have no, okay, making sure. Yes, so it's unanimous. Thank you very much. That brings us to item number 3, the consent agenda. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Newhoff. I move that we approve the minutes from the special board meeting on July 24th, 2020.
Thank you very much for that, that motion. Is there a second?
A second.
Trustee Johnson with the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in sorry, was there discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I guess that because I wasn't there that I need to abstain from this. Am I correct?
I believe that was the purpose of the action item, yes. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Chairman is aye. Is there any abstentions?
I abstain.
I abstain as well.
Trustee Ozuna and Trustee Smiley abstained, and the other trustees were ayes, so it would be 3-2. That then brings us then to our information and future agenda. And so so for the next meeting, which will be on August 25th, we'll be talking about our final status going into the school year. We also had a request this meeting. So between the meetings, I guess we'll have Mr. Heller will bring out, or at least direct us to a link where we could possibly review a demo link for the remote learning. It sounded like there was some available content that we could just review. Also, next meeting we'll be discussing some additional needs on our CIP document. And Trustee Ozuna had brought up a request for discussion on the red action item language that's within the fall reopening plan. So was there any other items that we wanted to discuss for the next meeting?
Chairman Clapton.
Clerk Newbold?
I believe Mr. Gillen needed to discuss some information with you. I'm sorry, I don't have it right off my head. If he is on, if he could elaborate on that.
Please, Mr. Gillen.
Chairman and trustees, thank you. It's less about needed and more if you wanted to have some information on, as you know, we start our L2 and our certification process. And so if you wanted to be able to have a work session and discuss the certification and the inputs and at least the dollar amounts that we may be looking at levying, we wouldn't have final market values. Those come out in early September, but we'll already be on a pretty crunch timeline just associated with the later start and the levy time period. So if you wanted to have some discussion, ideally that work session would be the time to do it before I bring it back for your approval. Not a requirement, just if it would be of interest to you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone who would be interested in that for the next meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I would be interested, but I think that we have to also be very cognizant of time to make sure that we are able to get all that in. But I think starting the discussion is very important because that's something we have to do quite rapidly once we have enrollment numbers. And they could be, and my goodness, they could be anywhere on the map this time around. And that the significance of the kids that actually show up when school opens is huge this year.
Thank you, Mr. Smiley, or Trustee Smiley. Is there any other discussion on this? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that, and I'll reach out to you and talk about that. I just want to review the entire agenda just to make sure, because I know the 25th is going to be it's already a busy schedule. So, but it is also a very important topic too.
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson.
Trustee Johnson, please.
I'm I'm not actually going to request this, but I'd maybe just ask for consideration and look to you and Dr. Reynolds to kind of talk through it. It's something that's came up in our information from patrons, and that's around allowing some form of public testimony. And I would just kind of see if you and Dr. Reynolds can talk through that and see. We do have the way that we're doing it today, but we've gotten some feedback that people would like a more open forum for that. So I would just see if you guys can talk through that and see what that might be available for the 25th.
I appreciate that. And I think, and I'm actually going to ask, I'm going to put Troy on the spot, if you don't mind, Troy. I think this is actually a technical issue where we don't have a way to do remote and still have have people come in and basically talk. I believe that's the issue. Troy, is that correct?
That's correct, Chairman Klopfenstein. We haven't overcome that issue yet at this point, in being able to allow people to join this meeting in a way that would allow us to have control, limiting people to a 3-minute time frame and so on. So I don't have an answer to be able to suggest what we can do for that just yet.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman,
if that be the case, then we had better figure out a way, however we do this, to have a live meeting.
You just realized we're going to have our live meeting in red. And so that's the challenge. Cliff Newbold and I talked about this for a previous meeting, that if in red, we would be back over at the White Cloud, I believe it is, the larger meeting room, but we'd only be allowing, I think we'd still only be allowing 50 at the max. It could even be less after tonight's meeting over at CDH, although I think that was just for social events. But so it could still be a max of 50, and we would probably have to deal with overflow and all this. And it was a bit of a logistics of trying to make sure we're open for everybody, but at the same time, being able to work within CDH's rules about COVID. So I think there's definitely some technical challenges, and maybe it's just a discussion that, knowing that the board would like to be open and have direct comment, that we can figure out some process for next meeting. Would that be fair?
That would be fair. That's something we absolutely need to discuss and figure out what the technical issues are.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, well, I'll make it a priority and reach out to Troy along with Newbold and others and just see what we can do. Excellent. So any other discussion items? I'm assuming not. Then we will move for adjournment.
So moved.
Trustee Johnson with the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Trustee Ozuna. Trustee Ozuna with the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Chairman is aye as well. So it's unanimous. Have a very good night. Thank you so much for your time this evening, and we'll see everyone later. Thank you.
Thank you.